I do think that is an example of how body cameras worn by police officers could have a positive impact in terms of building trust between law enforcement officers and the communities that they serve.
So let's get to work. Our guest here in studio is the police psychologist for the West Palm Beach, Florida Department, a clinical and forensic psychologist and law enforcement educator and trainer, an intimate knowledge of the police officer's mind. Welcome, Dr. Laurence Miller. And we're also joined by counseling psychologist at Logan University in Chesterfield, Missouri, a leading expert and teacher in the field, recently nominated for the prestigious William T. Kemper Award for Excellence in Teaching at Webster University, Dr. Jameca Falconer. Doctors both, I thank you both for joining us today.
Nice
Dr. Miller here in studio, Dr. Falconer, I know you're joining us there as well. Thank you. Dr. Miller, I'm going to begin with you because with the police mind that you have and knowing full well that you work with them, people want to ask, what is it? What is behind the mind of someone who has the power at that moment, yet when someone is fleeing from them, would fire 8 shots into the back of an individual saying that they fear for their lives?
Well, what a lot of people don't understand is that deadly force is not the same thing as excessive force. Any force that's used, even if it's gentle, if it's not required to preserve life and safety at the scene, is excessive force. So simply slapping someone who is not a threat is considered excessive force. On the other hand, if someone is physically threatening you, threatening your life as a police officer or the life of a civilian, and deadly force is the only option, then that is considered justified. The other thing that people don't realize is that even shooting at a fleeing suspect, if that officer can make the point that that suspect posed a danger to other people, perhaps the suspect had a gun, perhaps they were about to carjack a car, then even shooting someone from behind can be justified. The problem in this case is none of those elements are present. Again, I know no more than the average civilian watching this film, and I am not going to presume to judge the actions of any police officer in a situation of danger. But just based on the observation, I think everybody agrees Mr. Scott did not have a weapon. Mr. Scott was running away, not threatening anyone else. And in this case, it's very hard to justify an officer feeling that there was a danger either to himself or other civilians.
Dr. Falconer, I'm going to ask you two to weigh in on this, if you will, because we have basically the same question here, and certainly your experience as a psychologist comes to play here as well. Because here we have an individual who does not seem to be actually really in fear of his life or in any danger of his life, and I think that's what people are looking at right now, the psychology behind that. We've heard from the doctor here who knows the police department. What about from your perspective?
Well, my perspective has a lot to do with my work in Ferguson and how I know the people in Ferguson have felt in the past 9 months or so. And I would think that most people, most African-American men at this point feel like it's a danger to be stopped by a cop for anything. So I think that situation in and of itself is going to initiate fear.
But how do you then get past that? Because, and what you're saying is true, we've heard this from many people, that the African American community right now fears the police department, but it is only in many ways a small part of the police department. How do we get past that? What is the next step?
I think there are numerous next steps that need to occur, and many of them have already begun to occur in Ferguson. For instance, the recent elections, getting more people on the city council, that's going to help. But I think there also has to be an overwhelming majority of police forces over the country that begin to do more of what we call community policing, which involves a high level of trust between the community and the police officers. That has to be initiated.
I have about a minute left before we take a break, so Dr. Miller, let me get to you. That high level of trust that we're talking about, don't we also need the police department to be able to trust the citizenry as well? There has to be a mutual trust.
Right. One thing that every citizen...
Dr. Falconer, one moment, please.
One thing that every citizen wants to believe is that the people we put our trust in to protect us are indeed going to protect us. And again, I cannot speak from personal experience, but it must be a terrible feeling to realize that the people whose you may depend on to save your life may in fact take your life. What you find in communities where police are being accused of excessive force is what's often worse is the opposite. When there is a need, when the police are called to an emergency, there's often a lag, there's often a delay. So you get a double whammy. You have police departments that don't respond to real emergencies and then on minor types of situations may overreact. The irony is we kind of already know what works. We know that better selection and training of police officers works. We know that a better educated police force tends to have a lower rate of excessive force. We know that community outreach programs to members of the community so that the first time a citizen meets a police officer isn't during a stop.
Okay, let me stop you right there for just a moment. We have to take a break. I want to come back. I'm going to let you continue on this too. Dr. Falconer, if you would, please hold on just a couple of moments here because we need to take a break. A need to psychologically screen and monitor our police officers. But then there's also the shortage of recruits and much more. We'll talk about this when we continue right here on MidPoint. Welcome back to MidPoint. Police psychologist for the West Palm Beach, Florida Department. Joining us here in studio, Dr. Laurence Miller. And also joining us, counseling psychologist at Logan University in Chesterfield, Missouri, Dr. Jameca Falconer. Dr. Falconer, let me begin with you here because we continue to talk about this. And this is nothing really new. We've always talked about trust. We just lost the doctor here, so I'm going to come to you on this one. I can see where the signal went down. We talk about trust. We talk about having to make things better. And you were starting to discuss this as well, that we've been here before, though. We know this. We've heard all of these things before of what we need to do. Why have we not done them to this point? What are we waiting for?
Basically, what it boils down to is two things, will and money. The will part is the people who are in the higher echelons of law enforcement, the police managers, the captains, the chiefs, the assistant chiefs, the lieutenants, have to believe that this is something that's important. Because if the upper echelon believes it's important, then the rank and file will follow. What typically happens is somebody has a great idea, they present it to someone, it becomes just another unfunded mandate, and it goes nowhere. The other irony is many of these things are not that difficult and not that expensive. Improved training, there's already training that exists in law enforcement. Improved training in crisis intervention for mentally unstable individuals. Better communication skills. We teach hostage negotiators how to talk people out of life and death situations.
But if we've been doing all this for years, why hasn't it improved? Why are we still back here at South Carolina?
Because it hasn't been done systematically. Now, the South Carolina situation may be unique, and it's very important to realize most police officers do their jobs with honor, they do their jobs effectively, they want to do a good job, and they're just as disturbed by an incident like this as the civilians are, because they know when if the general public feels that this is the norm in policing, it puts my life in danger as another officer, because I'm going to be looked at from an adversarial perspective when I go out on patrol. So I've already got the deck stacked against me. It's in my interest for police departments to be perceived as helpers, not hurters of the community.
Dr. Falconer, let me come to you because you mentioned community policing a little while ago, and this is something else that we have heard, and I'm not trying to downgrade what we're talking about here, but simply put, we've heard a lot of these things for many, many years that we need to do. So community policing is a wonderful thing to say, but how does it work then? How do you get it to work when we have police departments tell us they can't bring in enough recruits, they can't pay enough recruits? I had the former mayor of Ferguson tell me this yesterday. He said, we can't compete to get the African-American officers we need because we can't pay what the big departments will pay. So then how do we bring that community policing together to where the citizenry is psychologically comfortable?
Well, I think it's really a multifaceted approach, and it begins with asking the community, asking the customers. So if you want to get a gauge of customer satisfaction, you have to always ask the customer. It's a sales approach. It's the same thing that has to be done in our community. So in other words, for instance, when Captain Ron Johnston from the Missouri Highway Patrol came into the Ferguson events after the shooting of Michael Brown, everyone felt better. Everyone felt a higher level of trust at that point. Why? Because Captain Johnson took the time to listen to people. He was out with the protests, talking to people, shaking hands, hugging people. In other words, he was there in the community. He was present.
But does that really work? I think
more.
that's the next thing. Does it really work? Because we've seen instances where communities have tried to get together, and it doesn't seem to work as well as, quite frankly, a lot of the experts seem to think it would.
I think it will work. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take time. You're going to have to rebuild the community at this point. In Ferguson, it's been destroyed. Trust has been destroyed. So it's going to have to be rebuilt, but it can be done one person at a time.
Can it be done one person at a time, though, in all the communities? I mean, really, because now we're not talking about Ferguson. We're talking about South Carolina.
I think in all communities, it's going to have to be done one person, one officer, one district at a time. It's going to take time. We're going to have to implement these programs, these policies, and then we're going to have to allow the community to interact with the policemen. The policemen should be living in these communities. They should be shopping with their community. They should be worshiping, playing, everything within this community so that the members of the community feel like they are a part of the community.
Dr. Miller, let me then ask you about a minute I have left here. What we're talking about here is digging into the psychology of the police officer. We're talking about making them a different type of police officer. Is it not fair to say that that blue shield, that blue wall of silence still is one of the biggest things? You've got to get through that and tell them to stop worrying about this, and every cop be honest.
Every cop that I know that's a good cop is not going to protect a cop that he or she thinks is a bad cop. One, for reason of ethics. Two, for reasons of reflection on their own self. What we're really talking about here is the bottom line is better training. If you look at every one of these events that's happened, almost every single one, you'll see there's a tipping point. A tipping point at which talking became physical interaction, which became excessive force or deadly force. Not every situation can be talked down, not every situation can be negotiated down. But like I mentioned before, you have individuals who are trained to do this in life and death situations, hostage negotiators. Take some of that training and teach it to the rank and file. So when someone is yelled at, spit at, cursed at, the immediate reaction is not to react with force.
Right.
It's to react with a stepped procedure.
Not every situation means to fire 8 shots. That's what we need to think of as well.
Or any shots.
Or any shots at all, okay? Dr. Falconer, thank you so much for joining us. This is something that we need to talk about again. We will have you back. Dr. Miller, thank you so much for
My
being
pleasure.
here on this.
Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure to do all this. 150 years ago, the end of the deadliest conflict ever on the United States